Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is looking at the astrological chart of Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa was a rock musician. The only song that I know by him was Valley Girl. That came out in 1982. I believe it was 82. And that was more of a novelty record. It wasn't really a serious song or anything like that. It was very funny. And it was basically his daughter talking, so it wasn't really a song. So when I was in high school, I had a friend, and it was her birthday, and I knew she liked Frank Zappa, so I bought her a Frank Zappa album, and it was called Don't Eat the Yellow Snow. And I never heard any of those songs on that album, nor have I might have heard a snippet of one of his songs, but I just don't know his work. I do believe that he may have employed different types of genres or explored them in his music. Maybe he even had fusion of some sort with jazz and rock. But anyway, the reason that I got the idea to do Frank Zappa is because today, earlier, I don't know if it was Facebook, it was some kind of a short, and it was his quote on education. And I've been trying to find it online. They just have the video, and I'm just looking where I could read it off. But I see that they have some stuff on AI that kind of summarizes his life philosophy. So I just wanted to say what they said. They said Frank Zappa's philosophy centered on fierce individualism, promoting critical thinking and the right for people to control their own lives and destinies, free from government overreach, organized religion, and censorship. He was a strict critic of conformity, advocating for self-education, political participation, and the separation of church and state. Zappa believed in taking responsibility for one's own reality, opposing the simplistic adherence to dogma and promoting the idea that reality is an individual construct. Okay, keep that in mind when I talk about his chart, because that's going to inform his, this is his belief system. I want to see where the astrological influences are that informs that philosophy. And I wish I could find that quote on educating children, because he was really down on the school system. And this was really being ahead of his time, because now we're seeing a lot of that going on these days. So Frank Zappa was born on December 21st, 1940 at 6:22 a.m. in Baltimore, Maryland. I was actually surprised that he was from Baltimore. For some reason, I thought maybe he was from California or something on the West Coast. But I do know that his father was part of the military industrial complex, because his father, I think, was involved with chemical weapons. And I know when he was a kid, I think he lived somewhere in California, or at least they moved to somewhere where they had, like, they were producing chemical weapons. And what was so interesting when I saw that quote on that little like little video blurb, is that he was putting down the military industrial complex, and his own father worked for it. So I wonder if he had a good relationship with his father. Again, I don't really know much about his life, and I don't really like doing videos where I don't know the person's background very much. But I think that some people who do know about him will be able to kind of connect the dots here. So he was a 29-degree Sagittarius sun sign. His moon was in Virgo. Mercury in Sag, Venus 0 degrees of Sagittarius, Mars in Scorpio, and Sagittarius rising. So, first and foremost, so much Sagittarius in the personal points means that he really had a rebellious spirit. And that's not a bad thing. I'm saying, when I say rebellious, I mean kind of going against the grain, so to speak. Apparently, he believed in questioning authority, and, he probably has multiple quotes about that. And I certainly have seen some that suggest that. And when I look at his chart, he has Mars opposing Uranus, which is exactly that. His Mars is in Scorpio, Uranus in Taurus. So they're forming an opposition, and Mars is the way that we behave, and Uranus is this planet of rebellion, nonconformity. So when it's at a hard angle, the person, it's like, there's like this quote, famous quote from Marlon Brando, I don't know which movie, where somebody asks him, what are you rebelling against? And he goes, what do you got? It's that kind of mentality. So it might be, you could say, a knee-jerk type of rebellion, or rebelling without a cause, the rebel without a cause. But I do think he had a cause for sure. He was very thoughtful, and he there was a method to his madness. He wasn't doing things mindlessly by a long shot. However, he probably did have that type of nature where the littlest thing probably made him feel very suffocated, because when you have that much Sag, it doesn't take much to make you feel like you can't breathe, like you're being tied down and imprisoned and things like that. So that's very interesting. And he had the moon in Sagittarius, and it's interesting because I have that combination myself of Sagittarius sun and Virgo moon. And I really get like such a strong Virgo vibe from him when he talks. And I think that was almost like one of the reasons I kind of wasn't attracted to his personality, was because he seemed like very snarky, but like the way he talked or something, it just seems so, there was something about it that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But, I can see that it's more of like when I saw that little clip, it was more the rebellious side of himself. And if his father was somebody who was connected to the military, then there was probably a clash not only of generations, but of ideologies. And, that's kind of a common thing for a father and a son to sometimes have totally opposing views. And when I look at the father and the father wound, I look to Saturn. Saturn is the sign of the father, and he has Saturn square Pluto, so that can definitely be this idea of the father or the authority figure. Saturn can be the authority figure that feels very oppressive, power hungry, power struggles with authority figures. He also has a square from Saturn to Chiron. So that, to me, that could be the father wound. And this is one of those things where there can be like a lot of, I think there can be a lot of pain with the same sex parent, because you will tend to identify with that parent regardless, and or want to identify with them. And if there's a problematic relationship with that parent, then it's like, where do you turn? So it becomes, there might be a feeling of alienation. Now, again, I don't really know the kind of relationship they had, so I might not be correct about that. So when somebody has Mercury in Sagittarius, they really have a strong desire for intellectual stimulation in general because Sagittarius rules the ninth house, which is the house of the higher mind. What's very interesting in Frank's chart, I saw some quote when I was trying to look up that education quote, where he said something about putting down like school or college, and then he said, but even worse is like getting him, turned on to religion or something. So I don't know if he just straight up called himself an atheist or he was just very critical of organized religion. But what's very interesting is that he had a conjunction between the moon and Neptune, and it was in the ninth house. The ninth house is the God house. Yes, it's the house of higher education and the higher mind. Okay, and he does seem like he's a very well-educated, albeit self-educated person. He went to one semester of junior college, apparently, and he was not like a big proponent of higher education. So he said, I saw a quote where he said something like, if you want to get laid, go to college or something. Oh my gosh, he was so irreverent and, like snarky to the max. But this suggests to me that he may have been a closet mystic, if you will. Because when you have, just by its own right, if you have the moon in conjunction with Neptune, you're going to tend to be very intuitive and very naturally psychic and spiritual. But in the ninth house, that can take it to like a very beautiful, magical degree where a person, it's like they have these mystical experiences. They can have like even visions that are mystical. If anyone knows anything about his spiritual life, please let me know in the comments, because I don't have any information. I'm just looking at his chart as I'm, after I press the record button. So I didn't really prepare for this, because I could have done research and all that jazz, but I just it was just kind of like doing this on a whim. So who knows, and maybe if he did have something like that, it might have even made him more convinced that organized religion is, the antithesis of actual communing with God. I think the last chart analysis I did for YouTube was on David Icke, the, so-called conspiracy theorist. And I believe it was him who said something like, schools misinform, religions lead you astray from God, and all of these other things. Like, they might have said something like, doctors don't heal, and, whatever. But it's like everyone who's supposed to be this expert in their field, it does the exact opposite, that sort of thing. And of course, that's a generalization, and it's not going to be true across the board, but I'm just very, very curious if he might have been a lot more spiritual than he led on to be. So he had Mars in Scorpio, and that is the sign of the person who's very driven to get to the bottom of something. If it was a profession, it would be whatchamacallit, a detective or a forensic worker or something like that. And it's interesting that he had Sag rising because he really did not seem like a Sagittarius in the way that he carried himself. He actually reminded me a bit of a Capricorn because his sun was on the cusp with Capricorn. And um, to me, when you have Sagittarius rising, because Sag is ruled by Jupiter and it's a fire sign, to me, people who have Sag rising are going to be jovial. You know, Jupiter is Jove, and just kind of cheerful. He seemed kind of almost like a curmudgeon, and kind of terse in his speech, and not very, he didn't seem warm. And he does have the sun in the first house, which should make him, the sun is exalted in the first house, and it should make somebody very warm as far as I'm concerned. It wasn't, his sun isn't in conjunction with the ascendant, and he has a square between the moon and the ascendant, as well as a conjunction from Mercury to the ascendant, which may be that kind of mental sort of person, that is part of his identity. And certainly people, I'm sure, appreciated his intellect and the things that he said. So maybe what I'm getting a vibe from is that he is more of his cerebral personality that was kind of more detached than, kind of warm. And when somebody has a sun in the first house, to me, it's almost, and, fire ascendant like Sag, then to me, it's almost a given that they will be a performer, because the sun in astrology rules the sign of Leo and the fifth house, which is the house of love and creativity, and very associated with, the arts and things like that, or creativity, I should say. So if you have your sun in the first house, then to me, with the Sag rising, that being a showman would come natural to such a person. And he did have a stellium in his fifth house of love and creativity. He had Uranus there, he had Saturn, and he had Jupiter. Now, it's interesting about the love angle, because his daughter Moon Unit, I guess, wrote a book. I don't know about you, but when there are new books that have come out, like, especially because I like to read biographies and autobiographies, but if some, famous person has written a book and it's been on the market for months, I'm like, how come I never heard that this person published their book? And I actually saw some of this interview that his daughter Moon Unit did with Drew Barrymore on Drew Barrymore's show, and I guess she was critical of the way that she was raised by Frank, and I'm assuming by his wife. But I think that she mentioned that they had an open marriage, Frank and his wife. Which, if that is correct, Uranus in the fifth house would certainly indicate free love. Of course, I have that myself. I'm not polyamorous, but that could indicate that for someone. Also, Jupiter in the fifth house. Jupiter can be something that is either in abundance or even excessive. And the fifth house can be recreational sex, or you could even say love. So if somebody has a tendency to kind of be in love with love, then it's possible that they might be attracted to an open marriage because they want to just indulge in that, or maybe it is just for the sex. Who knows? I don't really know. I'm sure it's different in various cases, but in any case, I believe that Moon is a Cancer, which would definitely that's the perfect example of how, sometimes the way you're raised depends on your particular nature and how you feel about it. If um, Moon had been a Gemini, she might have thought this was like the perfect setup. But and that's not entirely true because she had criticisms about him that went far beyond that. And I think that, when you're the child of a famous person, it might be very easy to feel neglected because of all of the things, they're so absorbed in their work that it can probably make it very hard to have that deep connection with them. So anyway, he does have a stellium in that fifth house, and that when you have a stellium, like three or more planets in a house, then you may be like emphasizing this particular part of your life. And definitely with him, the creative life was the center of his existence. And with Jupiter here, it can indicate somebody who's very prolific, and I believe he had a lot of albums. Saturn here is about someone who fifth house can be the house of pleasure, so it can indicate somebody who really um, has a hard time having fun. Like everything is serious to this person, and maybe even their hobbies become their career. Certainly that's true for him. And that reminds me, because I was really interested in the fact that his North Node was in his 10th house of career in the sign of Libra. So basically, your North Node is your soul's mission. And the soul's mission, because I know somebody in particular who is a musician, but that isn't what they do to earn their daily bread. They do something entirely different, entirely different. And if you asked this person, because this actually happened where my partner asked his buddy, this guy, or acquaintance, about his day job, and he was really just doing that to kind of um, tease him a little bit, because there was such a pained look that came over this guy's face, because that was the last thing he wanted to talk about was his day job. He is in several bands or something like that, and he plays with different groups, and that is his, probably we could say, his soul's mission, even though his day job has very handsomely supported his family, and that's what he did to make money. But when you have the North Node in the 10th house, it can be that that is one and the same. Your soul's mission is your source of income, and or your career, if you want to call it that. So, and in Libra, it would be something maybe connected to the arts, because Libra is ruled by Venus, the goddess of love and beauty. What really is kind of shocking to me is his 8th house. This is, in astrology, the 8th house is Scorpio's domain. So when we see planets in the 8th house, especially if they're challenging planets, that can indicate that there might have been some kind of trauma. And if this is not something that was widely reported on, then because you never know what somebody has been through. I don't care if they're a really famous person, if there's nobody else who they told about it, then how would anybody know? I mean, an example with some people is sexual abuse. And by the way, the eighth house can be something like that. But the eighth house can be any kind of power, abuse of power. I do consider sexual abuse a lot of times to be an abuse of power in addition to other things. But I mean, it's an abuse of power. But it can, be other things too. Um, but it's very interesting that Pluto is what is in conjunction with Chiron. And that can be like this this feeling of powerlessness because of that abuse or violation. And the eighth house can be deep shame, taboo, something that isn't like easily or widely shared because of there being like is considered a dark topic, or the person feels like they have to keep that secret. And I believe I got something similar with Elton John, interestingly enough. And Elton John, I not only read his autobiography, but I read a biography on him. They both came out around the same time. And, there was nothing that he mentioned that was, and he was very open about some other things, but he never mentioned anything that occurred to him maybe when he was a kid or anything that involved abuse per se. Um, yeah, I don't remember. I don't really think he had physical abuse, maybe by his mom, some type of, yeah, he did have problems with his mother, Elton John, but I'm talking about more kind of like stuff that you would hide and not tell people. So, but you never know. You absolutely never know. So, Frank does show this in his chart. And he had a square between Mercury and Neptune. When you have Mercury making contact with Neptune, the person can have a very dreamy mind. But with the hard angles, it can be, it might even be somebody who has a learning disability. I know, of course, he was crazy intelligent, like off the charts intelligent. But that doesn't mean that he might not have had dyslexia or some other type of thing going on. And that might have also soured his views on education because, especially in his day, I mean, he was born in 1940. So in his day, there probably was a lot less understanding and tolerance of diversity, like neurodivergent was the term I wanted to use. People who have hard angles like squares and oppositions from Mercury to Neptune, even the conjunction probably is a hard angle because of the nature of Neptune, can be very um, spacey, absent-minded, and daydreaming, or which can be ADD, kind of zoning out and things like that because of Neptune. But it's important to note that this is something that daydreaming is kind of like you might even think of it as visualizing. And when you do it very consciously, it can be used for manifestation purposes. But he doesn't come across that way. That's what's so weird about it. So I think, it's obvious here that he would be, possibly in the entertainment business because his midheaven is in Libra, and that can be about the arts. But yeah, his personality, it seems a little bit acerbic, and but I guess he was just looking for the truth. And by the way, when I was talking about like an open marriage, his Venus is at 0 degrees of Sagittarius, so technically it is in the sign of Sagittarius, which with Venus, his attitude might be, I need my freedom, even though I'm in a relationship with you. And so, yeah, I guess I'll leave it there. I hope that you enjoyed this. If you would like a personal reading, the link is below. Take care. Bye.